Okay, hi guys. This watch we're looking at today is a Seiko Diver. It's a solar chronograph, and the model number is SSC017. Now, you'll hear this watch referred to by different names. It has Air Diver written on the back, but it's also one of those watches from Seiko that's often referred to as a Prospex, which stands for Professional Specifications. So generally watches fit for a specific professional purpose, such as diving, might have Prospex on the dial or the tags or something like that somewhere. But really, it's not a terribly meaningful term, and as far as I can tell, there isn't a name for this watch as such, so the model number is best to go by. Now, I've had this watch for a couple of years, and it's a great watch in its own right, but there's a particular reason why I want to talk about the watch today, which is to present it as an alternative to another popular Seiko watch in roughly the same price range, which is the Seiko Flightmaster. So, the Flightmaster had a certain following anyway, but as far as the YouTube watch community goes, it's been further popularised recently by TGV over at the Urban Gentry channel, who quite rightly loves his Flightmaster and he's featured it in many of his videos. So in the unlikely event that you haven't seen any of those videos, I recommend that you check them out, because I don't have much to add to the information that's out there about the Flightmaster itself. It's really this watch that I want to compare to it or present as an alternative to it. Now, to that end, I will quickly run down the most important features of the Flightmaster so that we can actually discuss why this might be a great alternative. Now, the Flightmaster is clearly an aviation watch, and it's a quartz chronograph with 200-meter water resistance and Seiko's proprietary Hardlex crystal. So I will talk about how this Seiko Diver that I have here stacks up against the Flightmaster in each of those aspects that I just mentioned. But first, let's consider why you might even want an alternative to the Flightmaster, given that the Flightmaster is a great watch. So the most obvious reason is that you might specifically want a diver's watch and not an aviation watch. Perhaps you already have a lot of pilot's watches, or you only collect dive watches, and you might not even want to collect as such. You might be simply looking for one watch and want that watch to be a diver. In any of these cases, this would be a great watch to consider. Now, another potential reason is that you might want a slightly less busy watch. Although this diver that I have here is a busy watch with the chronograph, other subdials, a date indicator and a noticeable chapter ring, it's still nowhere near as complicated as the Flightmaster. You can see from the picture I've shown here that even for a pilot's watch, the Flightmaster comes with all sorts of calculation tools that really clutter up the dial. Now, personally, I love that look, but it's undeniable that it's an incredibly busy watch, and if you do like a complicated dial but just not that complicated, then this might be a great alternative. So if you are looking for a Seiko Diver in this price range, and one that has the chronograph feature, another thing that makes this watch appropriate is that, like the Flightmaster, the relatively smooth sweep of the chronograph hand makes it possible to, when you want to, achieve the effect of a mechanical watch by keeping the chronograph running, so that it looks like the sweeping second hand of a mechanical watch, rather than one that merely ticks off the individual seconds like a quartz watch. Now, the reason to mention this and to point out that this diver shares that feature with the Flightmaster is that it's not true of all quartz chronographs. Some quartz chronographs do simply tick by the second rather than sweeping, like this Parnis IWC homage. Now, of course, it's a bad idea to keep the chronograph running for long periods of time, because you'll just run the battery down. And the sweep isn't particularly smooth. There's still a lot more stutter than on almost any mechanical watch. But you can, nonetheless, get some of the flavour of a mechanical watch through this effect, just as you can with the Flightmaster. So, if you were considering the Flightmaster and that's a feature that appealed to you, you aren't losing anything in this respect by choosing this watch instead. So, getting back to the specs of the Flightmaster, I mentioned that it's a quartz piece, And the most noticeable difference in the specs between the Flightmaster and this watch is that the diver I have here is not a standard quartz watch, but a solar quartz. So clearly, whether this is a positive or a negative for you is a subjective personal question. For me personally, it's a wash and I don't have a preference. Water resistance wise, the stated water resistances of the Flightmaster and the diver are the same, 200 meters. What's probably a lot more important than that here is that these stated water resistances probably do translate to actual water resistance in practical terms in both pieces, because all of the crowns on each of these watches are screw-down crowns. Now clearly that's something that if you wouldn't expect it, you would at least very much hope for it in a diver like this. So in a sense, the Flightmaster probably does have a slight edge there, simply in terms of the credit that you can give it for including screw-down crowns, because it is an aviation piece and they aren't strictly necessary. You would expect them in this diver. Having said that, in practical terms, all it amounts to is that they do have the same water resistance. So are there particular advantages of the Flightmaster over the diver that I have here? The specs are similar enough that unless you prefer a standard quartz movement to the solar-powered one, the only reason of functionality that I can see to prefer the Flightmaster would be if you actually wanted to use the calculation tools. Honestly, in this respect, my experience is that basically no one uses these aviation complications. Whereas I do personally use the timing function of a diver's bezel, even though I don't dive, and so do lots of other people I know. So my purely anecdotal perspective here is that a diver's watch would probably offer more relevant complications for practical purposes to most people. Now that doesn't of course mean that the aesthetic contribution of those complications couldn't swing your decision and that you wouldn't prefer the look of the aviation piece even though you would find more practical use for the diver's bezel. Now while we're talking about the dials of these watches, and specifically the diver that I have here, I've seen differences in the lume on this piece in other YouTube reviews and so on. The version that I have here I bought at retail in a watch shop about 3 years ago, and the lume is not a brilliant white, it's a sort of off-white. And I've also seen questions about that come up in the comments on such YouTube reviews. Craig Shipp reviewed this watch and his version had the whiter lume from what I could see. And there was at least one question in the comments about the differences in the lume. The person asking the question would have preferred the more brilliant white as opposed to the type that I have here. And to be honest, so would I. It's not a deal breaker by any means, but I think a whiter lume would go much more effectively with the colour scheme of this watch in particular. This watch does come in different colours. There's a Coke version and a Pepsi version, so black and red and blue and red, as far as I understand. And there might be others, but certainly for this blue and black, I think a whiter lume would have been a much more appropriate choice. And I don't know why those differences exist. I haven't been able yet to find out exactly which models have which type of lume. But it is worth mentioning that you do get those two different types of lume with watches that look like this from Seiko, so that if you're buying online, say, if it's an eBay listing, etc., then if that difference is going to matter to you, at least you're aware of it and you can take a close look at the pictures to make sure that you know which one you're getting, or communicate with the seller to confirm with them, just so that you aren't disappointed when the watch turns up. Just as a side note, one thing to point out that I really do appreciate about the construction of this watch is that if you look at the lume pip at the top of the bezel, you can see that not only does it not protrude from the bezel, it isn't even flush with the bezel, it's actually recessed slightly. Now that's something I really like, because if you look at the review that I just did of my rotary chronospeed, which had a lume pip that stuck out from the bezel, the lume pip's missing, and I mentioned that it came off several times and that I tend to see it missing on that particular model of watch whenever I see it advertised used online. And It's a risk with protruding lume pips in general, and also crystals that stick out past the bezel. They can be caught on things and damaged as well, and I just don't like that. There's absolutely no chance that this could be caught on anything or damaged, and it is a functional watch. It's a diver. And so I just think it's really appropriate that they've taken practical considerations like that into account. So having considered the similarities, differences, and potential reasons to prefer either of these watches over the other, do I have a preference? On purely subjective aesthetics, I slightly prefer this one that I have here, but I can't pick a favourite in objective terms, and I made this video more to raise awareness of this piece for those who might prefer it. So perhaps the best way to end this video is to point out that these watches would also complement each other incredibly well. So if you don't have a clear favourite, then it would be difficult to go wrong by adding both of these to your collection. So thanks very much for watching, guys. Let me know what you think about the Flightmaster, about this piece, about how they relate to each other, or anything to do with Seiko or watches in general, and I'll see you in the next video.